Hey guys, it's Graham. What's crackin'? I've got a really good book for you today. I wanted to share it yesterday, but I was having some technical difficulties with my mic setup. I think I've got it all resolved now. Hopefully you guys can hear this better than some of the last videos that I've done. And I appreciate those of you who chimed in with the feedback to let me know it wasn't working so well. Today's book, can you tell I'm getting used to the new camera as well? It's been really nice to buy some new tech, and here I am figuring it all out. Final Flight by Peter Steckel. Chances are you haven't heard of Steckel. Chances are you haven't heard of the incident that I'm about to describe that this book is all about. It's not one that's gotten a whole ton of attention despite how fascinating it is, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. We'll get into it. But there's almost a story behind the story here of how I discovered this book and how and when I read it, and the amount of effort and grit and tenacity that went into discovering all the information inside of it and putting it together in one place for us all to read. So, without further ado, let's get in on it. So I grew up in the Las Vegas Valley. Our local paper, the biggest paper, was the Las Vegas Review-Journal. And I liked pulling through a couple of sections there, usually in like the B page, and reading about the local goings-on. It was kind of my thing growing up. There was also an almanac that had interesting historical bits. On this date in Nevada history, yada, yada, yada. And then if there was an article of particular interest to me, I'd cut it out and put it on my bedroom wall or stick it in a scrapbook. For those of you younger kids in the audience whose birth year starts with 20, this was how we used to favorite a tweet back in the day. If you wanted to recall something later, you had to physically cut it out of the paper and do that. So it was in this way that in the Nevada in the West section, on Friday, October 21st, 2005, I came across this article right here. Identification efforts begin on frozen body. It says right there, climbers spotted the remains of a World War II airman. Now, this was 2005. It was even before the MCU and all that. But even then, to those of us who grew up reading comics and familiar with those characters, if you hear that climbers found a frozen World War II serviceman, it's like, holy crap, there's a real-life Captain America out there somewhere. And then I paused and I thought, why would there be a World War II airman frozen in the Sierra Nevada mountains? Because as you go on and read the article, you find out that's where they found him. That's right there on the border between Nevada and California, right in that nice straight angle there that's not straight angle, but that straight line that separates our west side from their east side. And I thought it was a really fascinating concept. I had this mental picture of a guy in a parachute that had gotten stuck in this glacial wall. Turns out that's not exactly what it looked like when it happened. But these two hikers in the 21st century stumbled upon a frozen, dried out, blackened by the sun body. They pulled out their GPS, they hit a button to mark the location, and then they went back and found, I can't remember which federal entity it was, if it was the BLM or the Park Service or whatever, but they shared the coordinates and said, there's a dead body up there on the mountain. And so they sent an expedition up, carved this body out, and began trying to figure out just who this man was. Now, Peter Steckel is a guy who grew up not far from the Sierra Nevada mountains and spent his youth and all the intervening decades going on long hikes up there. And so this story fascinated him. He was very familiar with that area, and he knew what it took to climb up around there. And, if there were dead bodies up there that he'd never stumbled upon, like obviously that was a big deal to him. So he became very, very interested in this story. And he eventually went up there after doing a little bit of research, a little bit of investigation into what was going on. He eventually went on another big, long hike in that same area with a friend of his, and he became part of the story when he found a second body up in the ice. And this thing just blew up and became bigger and bigger and bigger. Over the next couple of years, Steckel would start pouring through Army records, start studying meteorology, start studying aviation, as he pulled at the many threads involved in identifying these two frozen airmen. What he found was simply amazing. Basically, there was a crew of 4 aboard an Army aircraft back in the 40s, and somehow they went missing. The plane crashed, cause undetermined, but the bodies were lost in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Shortly after that crash happened in the 40s, the Army sent an expedition up there to try to find any remains or possibly any survivors. I think that they were up there for a couple of days. They found a little bit of human remains. They were looking for 4 people. They did not find 4 people's worth of remains. I want to say that as delicately as I can. They brought back what they could, and all 4 of them were marked in a tombstone in a military cemetery. And that was how those 4 men were remembered until those 2 hikers in 2005 spotted this airman, and until Peter Steckel found the second one. I want to say it was 2 years later. So they played a key role in unearthing their story at the same time that their remains were unearthed. The book has a lot of pictures included in here. That's the type of plane that they were flying. This isn't the picture of the crew. This man right here was one of them, but the rest of them were airmen in another unit or whatever designation there is. Back in the 1940s, there wasn't an Air Force yet. I don't know what year the Air Force was started, but back then the Air Force, such as we had it, was a division of the Army. It was called the Army Air Corps. In fact, in my hometown, Henderson, Nevada, there was an old World War II veteran, a man who'd been in the Pacific in Okinawa. And he didn't serve in the Army Air Corps, but he had friends that did, and he told me what it was like back then. Those were fascinating stories to hear. Other pictures in the book will highlight the 4 different men. Their names were John Mortensen, Leo Mustonen, William Gamber, and Glenn Munn. I like Glenn Munn's like Charles Atlas looking picture here. Sorry, like I said, I'm still kind of boomerang the technology. The new camera setup mirrors in a way that my last one didn't. But they were the 4 men who were on that plane, and Leo Mustonen, specifically, the tall gentleman here on the right of this picture, was the first one that was found. I can't remember which of the other men was found by Steckel later on. But he had to do a ton of digging into, like I said, into records to figure out, which plane these men were on, what day it happened, where they went, how far they could have flown, and what could have caused their plane to crash. It turns out those old Beecher aircraft were notoriously difficult to control in inclement weather conditions, which you could find yourself in those conditions very, very suddenly in the Sierra Nevadas. Altitude could have been a factor. You could have been flying through a cloud bank and then very suddenly found yourself headed for a mountain and you didn't have the maneuverability to turn before you plowed into it. They did eventually find other wreckage of the airplane, but he couldn't stop pulling at this thread until he answered every single question that came to him throughout the course of his investigation. I found it especially touching in one of the later chapters when he found out the names of the towns where these men had lived, and he went to look for any living relatives or descendants of theirs. And there were a couple of them where, he found these women who remembered their grandmothers talking about their big brother who had gone missing in the war. That's how much of an impact their loss had on their families, and to give them some degree of closure had to be immensely fulfilling and immensely satisfying. When you go to public school, they've only got so much time to hit on, what they deem to be the biggest and most important things when they're teaching you history lessons. And so you've got to hit the bullet points. We talk about, the big events in American history, Columbus, the Mayflower, the American Revolution, all the wars that have happened since then. And it's easy to lose sight of just how many other stories are intertwined in all of that seem small and insignificant compared to the big picture. But to these families, and these people, it's their entire world. It's the most important thing to them. Maybe they do have a big perspective on the entire war and yada, yada, yada. But what could possibly be more important to them than the one family member that they lost? And for that, I highly commend Steckel for the effort that he put into bringing closure to these families and telling the stories of these men. May and June, it's a stretch on the calendar where we have a lot of holidays, that are not just American holidays, but kind of specifically American military holidays. We have Memorial Day, we have Armed Forces Day, and Flag Day, which was just a couple of days ago. And, you'll see memes flying around on the internet like, hey, this isn't just a day for barbecues and mattress sales, and they're kind of chiding, even if they do have a point. But I'm not here to chide anybody, but I just want to throw in my 2 cents on this, that those dates on the calendar matter, and they especially matter for the people who have to celebrate Memorial Day because of a loss in the family, for the people who celebrate Armed Forces Day because a living family member of theirs has dedicated their life to that particular line of work and that line of service. Even Flag Day, it's not just one more day to fly the flag. We ought to look into, why that day was established. Yeah, we don't get the day off of work. That's fine. But these things, we have them for a reason, and we ought to find the meaning in that. Both of my grandfathers were veterans. My mom's dad, he had an Italian surname. He was first-generation American. I asked him once, where he was from, and he would say Italy. But I'd ask where he was born, and he'd say New Jersey. It was one of those situations. But, he was very proudly Italian. He was my mom's stepdad, so, I can't claim any of that Nostra Familia type stuff. But, he ended up serving in World War II. He was an MP in Italy. And this was back at a time when, any kind of racial distinction that anybody could make about you, they brought it up a lot. He got called a WAP. If you're unfamiliar with that term, it's supposed to be an acronym for without papers. It's what they called Italian immigrants who snuck into the country. Despite the fact that he was born here, that was the kind of flack that he took, but he still, fought in the war. He still served in the uniform. And, my papa on the other side, he was a coal country hillbilly. I don't know if he was enlisted or if he was drafted or what. He fought in Korea. And by fought, I mean fought. He had a combat rifleman, infantryman badge that I've still got in my hutch upstairs. I showed it to a coworker of mine years ago, a man who had fought in Afghanistan. And I said, I got this in a box of sundries after my papa died. I don't know exactly what it means. And he told me, and he goes, basically, if your papa was wearing one of those in Korea, chances are he had to fix bayonets and kill people up close at some point. And that kind of blew my mind. My papa didn't talk a whole lot about his war service. The one thing that I remember him explaining to me was he pulled out the old telegram, like the little piece of paper, the yellowed cardstock, written up on a typewriter. The telegram that they sent to his mother, to my great-grandmother Nora Patton, after a grenade went off behind him and filled his back with shrapnel and landed him in the infirmary and ultimately earned him a Purple Heart. And they said, we regret to inform you that your son Robert Bradley was minorly wounded. That's not the exact verbiage, but he pointed out minorly wounded. And he looked at me in that thick Kentucky accent of his. He goes, minorly wounded my ass. I was in that infirmary for over a year. I was like, okay. We're obviously a nation that argues a lot over the different wars that we've been in and why we go there, and that can be a separate topic. I want to talk about, the people that serve in those campaigns, the people that fight and suffer and die in them. Those are the stories that are worth remembering, that deserve to be remembered. And I think Peter Steckel, again, he went above and beyond the call to unearth those stories and put it all in one spot where it's easily digestible, and sell it to a small press and do what he could to get it out there. According to the copyright date on this, first edition was 2010. I can't remember when I first heard about the book, but I remember kind of sorting through my scrapbook a while ago, and seeing that article and thinking, oh, I wonder if they ever ID'd Captain America, if they ever found out who this Steve Rogers guy is. And I think I Googled it a year and a half ago, and saw that they'd identified Leo Mustonen and that there was a book about it. And so I bought it, and 6 months later got around to reading it, oddly enough on an airplane when I was flying to Pennsylvania last fall. And I couldn't put it down. That is the mark of a great story, whether it's fiction or non. And the fact that all this really happened, and that I got to kind of see Steckel's process in real time as he became consumed by this story and put it all together. It's very moving. It's very inspiring. This ended up being one of my best reads of 2021, which was a year that was kind of short on best reads. Seems like most years I'm trying to limit myself to just put 10 on the list. If I read 15 books that I mark as the best of, I got to kind of cull them out. And then last year, I think I had like 6 or 7. This year so far, I might have 4. But this one was a very, very easy pick. And not just because it was the tail end of this old article that I clipped out when I was 21 years old. So that's what makes it worth discussing here. That's why I wanted to share it with you guys. If you can find a copy at your library, or you can get it on Amazon, I'll put a link in the description on this video. And I'll probably link to Steckel's website as well. Drop him a line, tell him you heard about his book, and let him know what you think about the work that he put into this. So thank you guys for tuning in and for listening to this video. Again, I hope the sound pickup was a lot better. That's my mic right there. If you're looking for more book recommendations on the fiction side, I'm a contributor to a website, upstreamreviews.com, run by Declan Finn and Rob Cruzy, and there are a bunch of other independent authors who are also contributors to it, where we make recommendations on speculative fiction, mostly indie stuff that doesn't get as much attention and marketing as the stuff from the big publishing houses, but stuff that's worth your time anyway. And in the meantime, I'll keep doing my best to discuss great nonfiction here and share it with you all. That's it for now. Drive safe. See you guys out there.